Every Christ follower has the responsibility to share that story. That's it. Every person has the right to hear the story of God's love, and every Christ follower has the responsibility to share that story. Now, if you brought a copy of God's Word, we're in 2 Kings chapter 7, and before we begin to read this passage of Scripture, let me give you the background of the story. There was a kingdom called the Kingdom of Israel, and the last king over that kingdom as a whole was a king by the name of Solomon. Solomon has now died, and after Solomon dies, they have an internal war. And that internal war caused a split, and the kingdom of David is now divided into two kingdoms. It's divided into a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. The northern kingdom is now going to be known as Israel, and the southern kingdom is now going to be known as Judah. Now, the story that we're studying today deals with the northern kingdom of Israel. This kingdom is under siege by the Syrian army. The city is surrounded. So if you can picture this, you're in the capital city there of Israel, and your entire city is surrounded by the Syrian army. So there's no way you can get out. Supplies have been cut off. Food situation is desperate. The nation's starving to death. There's no way out. There's no way to escape. They look at the numbers. They're vastly outnumbered. They're outmanned. They're outgunned. They can't fight their way out. Flight is out of the question because they can't run away. They're completely surrounded, and it looks like everything is lost. Now, outside of these four walls sit 4 lepers. And the reason why they're sitting outside the walls is because lepers were not welcome. Lepers were social outcasts. They were not allowed into the city. They were ostracized. That's why they were not sitting inside the city gates. So you've got the city behind you. You're sitting here as 4 lepers, and you see this vast Syrian army out there in front of you. So they're surveying their situation. They realize basically they've only got 3 options, and they're all very bad. 2 Kings 7, verse 3. Now there were 4 men who were lepers at the entrance at the gate. And they said to one another, "Why are we sitting here until we die? If we say, 'Let us enter the city,' the famine is in the city, and we shall die there. If we sit here, we die also. So now come, let us go over to the camp of the Syrians. If they spare our lives, we shall live. If they kill us, we shall but die." Now, what they did is what you and I would do. They're in a mess. They're in a pickle. They're kind of sizing up the situation. They're trying to figure out, okay, what are our options? Well, they've only got 3, and they're pretty simple. If we sit here and do nothing, we're going to die. And that's assuming they will let us back in. If they even let us back into the city, we're going to die with them. But if we go to the Syrians, one of 2 things could happen. A, they might just let us live. They might give us some food and clothing and send us on our way, and we might get out of this alive, or they may kill us. But even if they kill us, we haven't lost anything. So they realize the only hope they have of surviving is simply to make their way to the Syrian camp. So they do that, and the story continues. So they arose at twilight to go to the camp of the Syrians. But when they came to the edge of the camp of the Syrians, behold, there was no one there. For the Lord had made the army of the Syrians hear the sound of chariots and of horses, the sound of a great army, so that they said to one another, "Behold, the king of Israel has hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Egypt to come against us." So they fled away in the twilight and abandoned their tents, their horses, their donkeys, leaving the camp as it was, and fled for their lives. Now watch this. This is so cool. When the lepers came to the edge of the camp, they went into a tent and ate and drank and carried off silver and gold and clothing and went and hid them. Then they came back and entered another tent and carried off things from it and went and hid them. Now this is an incredible part of the story. They go walking into the camp thinking they're walking into certain death. They're thinking they're going to kill us anyway. They don't want any lepers on their hands. And as soon as they see we're lepers, they're going to drop us 100 yards from the camp anyway. And they're expecting to die, but the camp's totally empty. And they go into this tent, and they can't believe what has happened, because what God did was he sends this invisible angelic army into their camp, causing the Syrian army to flee, leaving behind all this food and all this money and all this clothing and all these supplies that the city needed to live. Now, all of a sudden, just like that, everything has changed. These 4 lepers know, boys, we have struck the mother lode. They had become instant. They are the Beverly Hillbillies. The oil is gushing up out of the ground. They have become instant millionaires. Just like that, they had gone from leprosy to luxury. And what did they do? They did the same thing you and I would have done. They start filling their hungry stomachs with food, and they start filling their parched throats with water, and they started taking off the rags and putting on the robes, and they put brand new sandals on their blistered feet. And they're having the time of their life. They're throwing the gold up in the air and the silver up in there. They say, oh man, what time does the mall open? And then this small little matter comes to their mind. What about the people in the city who are still hungry and still thirsty and still naked? What are we going to do? Are we going to take an every man for himself approach? Are we going to say, I got mine, you get yours? They had the one and only solution to every problem that everybody in that city faced. Because there's only one solution to hunger, and that's food. There's only one solution to thirst, and that's water. There's only one solution to being cold and naked, and that's clothing. There's only one solution to bondage, and that's freedom. And these lepers had it all. They had everything that the city needed to survive. So what are they going to do? What they did and why they did it tell us why you and I ought to be connecting with other people who are far from God. So there are three things I want you to write down this morning we're going to learn from this lesson. Number one, if you're going to be a devoted follower of Jesus Christ, I need to see the condition of people without God. I really need to see the condition of people without God. Now, to fully understand the story, you've got to go back and see just how desperate the situation was. So I want to go back one chapter, chapter 6, verse 24. Afterward, Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, mustered his entire army and went up and besieged Samaria. So this is the beginning of the siege. And there was a great famine in Samaria because they couldn't get any food, as they besieged it, until a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver, and the fourth part of a kabath dove's dung for 5 shekels of silver. Now, you think our economy's bad? You think we're in bad shape? This made the Great Depression look like a free day at Disney World. I mean, this is how bad things are. The only thing you could eat was a donkey head burger. That's all. And it was selling for $50 a piece. And things are so bad, you say, man, that is bad. Oh, it's worse than that. Things were so bad, the famine was so severe, the people were so hungry, they even began eating their own children. Listen to this. The king's talking to a mother, and he asked her, what is your trouble? She answered, this woman said to me, give your son that we may eat him today, and we'll eat my son tomorrow. Now, every parent has thought about making that trade. I get that, okay? Give your son that we may eat him today, and we'll eat my son tomorrow. Now, watch this. So we boiled my son and ate him. Can you imagine that? And on the next day I said to her, give your son that we may eat him, but she has hidden her son. Now, can you imagine hunger so extreme that mothers begin to eat their own children? Well, keep this in mind, behind every literal story in the Old Testament, there's also a spiritual meaning. Now, I want to tell you what that meaning is. I realize there's a problem today with physical hunger in our world, but I want to tell you there's an even greater famine today in the world than a physical famine for food and a physical famine for clothing and a physical famine for water. And it's a famine that the prophet Amos talked about when he said this in Amos chapter 8, verse 11. He said, behold, days are coming, declares the Lord God, when I will send a famine on the land, not a famine for bread or a thirst for water, but rather for hearing the words of the Lord. And the Bible clearly teaches that, yes, there are physical problems in the world. There are people who go hungry every night. There are people who die because they don't have good water. There are people who die because of being exposed to the elements. But at the same time, the Bible also makes something very plain. Even though we have a job and a responsibility as a church and as individual believers to meet physical needs, our greatest problems are not physical, they are spiritual. Because do we need to feed the hungry? Sure. Do we need to clothe the poor? Absolutely. But think about this. Even if we could today give every person on this planet 3 square meals a day, a car in every garage, and clothes on everyone's back, we still would not begin to address and solve the problems of rape, murder, violence, war, and terrorism, because those are not physical problems. Those are spiritual problems. Now keep that in mind as we continue the story. Now as the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried out to him saying, help my lord, O king. And he said, now this is the king talking, if the Lord will not help you, how shall I help you? you just got to feel sorry for the king. Because even the king recognized, you ready? Even the king recognized there are some problems that even politics can't solve. I hate to break the bubble for some of you in this room. There are problems in this country a ballot box will not solve. We've got problems no president can solve. We've got problems no Congress can solve. We've got problems no political party can solve. Because political solutions don't work for spiritual problems. And it was against this backdrop of famine and hunger and thirst and hopelessness that these lepers saw and began to understand why they had come into all these riches. And that leads me to ask you to write down a second truth. It's not enough just to see the condition of those around you who do not have God. Secondly, I need to seek out those who need what I now have. I need to seek out those who need what I now have. Now go back to 2 Kings 7, look in verse 7. And when these lepers came to the edge of the camp, they went into a tent and ate and drank. They carried off silver and gold and clothing and went and hid them. Then they came back and entered another tent and carried all things from it and went and hid them. Now get that scene down in your mind. For the first time in their life, these guys are living like kings. Stuffing their bellies full of food, their pockets full of gold. Everybody else, what are they doing? They're eating donkey head burgers. They're sucking dove dungs with a straw. But these guys, man, they're eating filet mignon and apple pie and baked potato. I'm going to stop right there. And one thing puts all this in perspective, and we're going somewhere with this. You just got to keep tracking with me. What had these lepers done to deserve all that stuff? Somebody tell me. Nothing. They had not done one thing. I mean, every single bite of food they took, every piece of jewelry they put on, every gold nugget they stuffed in their pocket, all had been provided by the grace of God. These lepers didn't deserve one thing they were enjoying. They hadn't fought one battle. They hadn't shot one arrow. They hadn't thrown one spear. They had not killed one soldier. They hadn't bought one piece of bread. They hadn't earned one piece of gold. It was all by the grace of God. Now, I know we all get that. We all understand that. But now I want to add a verse that Jesus said. Jesus said in John 12, verse 48, Luke 12, 48, to whom much is given from him, let's read that rest of that together. Much will be what? Required. To whom much is given, much will be required. Now, you're sitting there and you're saying, I am a devoted follower of Jesus Christ. Then I want to submit this to you. It is because of what Jesus Christ has done for us that we not only see those who are far from God, we want to connect with those who are far from God. It's not enough just to see the condition of those who do not know God. We have a responsibility to seek out those who need what we have. We're to seek boldly. God has told this church and every church, I want you to go boldly and I want you to share and declare the gospel to our neighbors and to our nation. So go back to these lepers. Now they're having a blast. They're living it up. And all of a sudden they start thinking about these people still in the city who didn't know what they knew. And they stopped. And maybe you can hear what they heard. Maybe you can hear the babies up there crying and dying because they had no milk. Maybe you could see the children up there freezing because they have no clothing. Maybe you can sense the people up there dying like flies because they had no food. And here they are sitting there. They've got more than they could eat in 10 lifetimes. More than they could wear in 10 lifetimes. More money than they could spend in 10 lifetimes. So at this point now, when you're at this point in your life, you will do one of two things, always. You will sit on what you have and say nothing, or you'll seek out those who need what you have so they can have it too. You'll do one of two things, which leads me to the last lesson. And that is, I need to share my story of God's love with others who have never heard it. Now, every now and then, I read a statement in the Bible that just really shakes my world. It really rocks my world. This one is one of those. Listen to this, 2 Kings 7, verse 9. Then they said to one another, we are not doing right. This day is the day of good news. If we are silent and wait until the morning light, punishment will overtake us. Now therefore come, let us go and tell the king's household. Now I want you to listen to what they said again. All of a sudden they're talking. All of a sudden they put down their plate, put down their food, put down the jewelry, take their gold out of their pocket, sit down, look at each other and say, we're not doing right. We're doing something here terribly wrong. You say, wait a minute, time out. Well, what do you mean you're not doing right? You're just enjoying the spoils of victory. You're hungry and you're eating. You're thirsty and you're drinking. You've got rags, you're exchanging them for robes. You're just placating your hunger and your thirst. What do you mean you're doing? What are you doing wrong? You're not breaking any laws. You're not committing any felonies. Well, what were they doing that was not? What was it that was not right about their situation? Here's what was not right. It is not right to have a story to share with those who need to hear it and not share it. It is not right to have a story to share with those who need to hear it and not share it. Now, I want you to go back several thousand years. And I want you to imagine you're one of these 4 lepers. And I want you to imagine that you're sitting there and you decide, I'm not going to say anything to anybody. It's every man for himself. I got mine, you get yours. You don't get yours, tough luck. And you don't say a word to anybody. Now, I want you to imagine that you're a parent. And I want you to imagine that you have 3 children, a newborn, a 2-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And I want you to imagine that your children die of starvation. And you meet these lepers. And you find out these lepers had all and more than enough food they could ever have. And these lepers could have saved the lives of your children if they had just shared a little bit of what they had. What would you want to do to those lepers? Or imagine you're one of those lepers and you just simply choose to sit on what you have and not share it. I'm not going to tell anybody what I've got. And then I want you to imagine that you meet 2 parents and they're weeping and they're crying and you go up to them and you say, I don't mean to butt in, but I'm so sorry. It's obvious you're upset about something. Can you tell me what's breaking your heart? Well, we just buried our 3 children. You did? Yes, because they just starved to death because they had no food. So how would you feel? There's a story I've been waiting to share for several months. And I waited until now, and it's just one of the best things, these things ever happened in my life. Recently, because of the generosity of some men and some who were in this church, I got to take a dream trip in June to Scotland. And I got to play some of the finest golf courses in the world. We played, I think, 7 or 8, all of the top 100 in the world. I mean, just to think about, if you're a golfer, the great courses in Scotland, got to play. I would have never gotten to do it had it not been for the generosity of some men in our church. They knew who they are, and I just want to, again, thank them for doing it and pray they'll do it again. We all thought when we got on the plane to fly to Edinburgh that we were going over there to play golf. Really wasn't the reason. We thought it was. The primary purpose of the trip centered around this picture. Now, this is a picture of me and my caddy on the 13th fairway of St. Andrews, the old course there in Scotland. His name is Alex, and he has caddied at St. Andrews for 38 years. Just before you tee off at St. Andrews, you're on the first tee. They have a caddy house, and you know caddies wait in line to caddy for different people, and you have to have a caddy if you're going to play St. Andrews. So you don't know who your caddy's going to be. They don't know who their golfer's going to be. It's just kind of quote unquote the luck of the draw. I don't believe in luck, in particularly this instance. But so you know they all come up, and I don't know how they pair people up. Okay, I don't know how they do that. I think I've kind of learned. I was watching them. The really wise caddies look at who they think's the best golfer, and they run to them. Because I was the last guy in my group chosen. I kind of figured out how that worked. So Alex comes walking over to me like he's got the booby prize, and so introduces himself and tells my name's Alex. I said my name's James, and what's your handicap? And I said every club in the bag's my handicap. And so we're kind of joking back and forth. And he says, well, I'm going to be your caddy for the day. And I said, well, Alex, do you mind? I have a question I'd like to ask you that I ask everyone that caddies for me when I get to play with a caddy. I said, I'm a pastor of a church in America. And he said, oh, really? I said, yes. And I said, I really do like to talk about spiritual things. And I just wanted to know if it would be all right with you if we talked about spiritual things. I said, now, if the answer is no, and by the way, I had a couple of cases say, I don't want to do that. I said, if the answer is no, I'm good. That's not what you're being paid to do. I understand that. Don't want to be uncomfortable for you. I'm not preaching to you. I just would love to just talk to you about spiritual things. He said, oh, Laddie. I found out everybody's called Laddie over there. It doesn't matter. You be 90 years old, they're going to call you Laddie. He said, oh, Laddie, that's okay. He said, of course, I would love to talk to you about spiritual things. That would be nice. I said, okay. So at the very beginning of the very first hole, I just start sharing my story. I don't start preaching, or I don't have a 3-point outline, or can you write this down? Now, nothing like that at all. I'm just talking like I'm talking to you. And I began to share how I grew up in church and how I realized as a young boy that I was a sinner and how my sin had separated me from God. And I began to share with him how I learned that one day that God loved me so much that he sent his son, Jesus Christ, to die for my sin. And I began to share with him how I became convinced that Jesus was indeed raised from the dead. And then I got to the point where I'm 9 years old. I'm sitting in a movie theater and I'm watching this movie and I give my life to Jesus Christ, how Christ transformed my life. Now that happened over 13 holes. And we're talking about a lot of things. I'm not just preaching to the guy or anything like that. We're just talking, just having a conversation. So on the 13th fairway, I've kind of, shared the gospel with him, and I looked at him and I said, we're walking down the golf course, and I said, Alex, I said, does my story make sense to you? Oh, Laddie, it's a wonderful story. And I said, well, does it make sense to you? He said, well, yes, Laddie, it does make sense to me. And I said, well, Alex, I said, can you think of any reason you could give God that God would accept why you couldn't ask Jesus Christ to come into your heart? No, Laddie, I don't know of any reason why I could not do that. And I said, well, would you be willing right now to pray right here? And would you be willing to ask Jesus Christ into your life? I'd love to help you do that. I mean, he literally puts my bag down, takes his hat off, and he says, yes, Laddie, I would like to do that. So I bow my head, and I said, well, Alex, I'm going to pray for you, and I want you to pray with me. So I pray, and I said, oh, God, please do for Alex what you did for me as a 9-year-old boy, and thank you for this opportunity, blah, blah. Now, Alex, I want you to pray this prayer with me. And he said, okay, Laddie, you pray, I'll pray. So I prayed, and he prayed and asked Christ into his heart. So he gets through praying to receive Christ. This is where the story gets a little bit funny. He gets through praying to receive Christ. And I hadn't looked up. I'm still looking down. And without looking at him, I said, now, Alex, did you really mean that prayer that you prayed? Did you really surrender your life to Christ? And it was only then that I turned and looked at him. And then when I turned and looked at him, it's like Niagara Falls, man, coming down those weather-beaten cheeks. And he looked at me and he said, Laddie, do you know Scots? Scots do not cry. Of course I gave my life to Jesus. Do you see these tears? Do you think I'd make this up? No, I just was asking. Okay, time out. Hallelujah, you're saved. No problem. It was at that moment one of my buddies who stood there and heard what happened said, let's get a picture. And when I put my arm around him, he had just prayed to receive Christ when that picture was taken. So we play out. We put out on the 18th